Young Razor, nigga. I'm back in this bitch, nigga. Don't stop,
get money, hustle or die, nigga. Trap or die, nigga. All about this cash. From the west side, 6 Street, you know what it is. Locally known and respected, nigga. My niggas Maryville, everything,
gutter, motherfucker. Stay on your
gutter,
brain,
man.
I keep it gutter, motherfucker.
Get your money up, nigga. Never you hate it.
Keep it gutter, motherfucker. I'm deep in the game, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You know my name, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I stay on your brain, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You gon' feel my pain. I don't need no acceptance or recognition. Squeeze at your click until my gun click. Fuck them niggas who you run with. Cause when the drum hit, them be the same niggas that you run with. You could be a good relay racer, cause when the kid face you, make track faster than speed racer, and they ain't playing catch up. I'ma meet you where you sleep and turn your motherfucking brains into ketchup. Make sure you never run again. Leave you stiffer in the tomb or you buried in cement, bitch. And your niggas ain't clapping back. They just ride to the song with your MMRT on. My niggas bang at your chest plate for target practice. With more precise hits than a sniper. Then you niggas riper than that kid in the piece. Think shit sweet till you see a piece of your face in the street. And that's just my description of roadkill. Ain't mentioned the other half for your head in the wheel. Niggas need to lay back and chill. Before I catch a laid back dog, put your body on chill. I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You know my name, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I'm deep in the game, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I stay on your brain, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You gon' feel my pain, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I'm deep in the game, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You know my name, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I stay on your brain, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You gon' feel my pain. I bang drums like Nick Cannon, 9 nickel cannon. Make niggas swallow shells whole like Yoshi. Keep 8 balls bigger than Kirby. More bricks than the project, bitch. Quick untouchable like electric eels, and fire through that ass that burn like knives and pills, and water can't put you out. Not eternal flame, melt your brain, cook your organs. Young Razor, bitch. Yeah, I'm off the chain and ain't talking about the lease. It's a chainsaw that leave body parts in Ziploc bags. Ain't from Texas, but I keep a motherfucking chainsaw on the mask. Watch the news, it's a massacre in the hood near you. Damn dog, if you only knew, you would vacate your home and keep your name in the phone books unknown. I stalk niggas like bounty hunters and kill on sight. Read you your rights and lock you in a cell-type casket. Young Razor known for spitting up acid. Call me toxic waste. Had you kneeling down, picking up the rest of your face. Cause everything I spit drop jaws, and when I drop jaws, bitches get locked doors. Got the game locked, dog. Enroll green buzz bigger than Swamp Thing. That ain't about money, don't say my name. Pawn niggas body bust for currency, cocaine and platinum chains. I don't give a fuck, my aim is long. Y'all niggas talking all that shit, dog. Go the fuck on. Keep it gutter, motherfucker. You know my name, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I stay on your brain, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I'm deep in the game, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You gon' feel my pain, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You know my name, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I'm deep in the game, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. I stay on your brain, I keep it gutter, motherfucker. You gon' feel my pain. Ha! West side, nigga. Let the beat ride. Yeah, I know you feel this shit. It's that hot shit, boy.
And welcome to the Jameel Rawls Show. And tonight what we're doing is we're going over some new and interesting information pertaining to myself and my show. And recently I came across some information in the last couple of months revolving around Hermanubis, which is a wolf god based on wolf mythology, coming out of the Greco-Roman era. Basically, Hermanubis is a mix between Anubis and Hermes, the Mercury god, and that's why Hermanubis carries the caduceus. And you can see there's a photograph of Hermanubis at the Vatican in Rome. Now, we all know that the Egyptians in Africa came out with Anubis, and so Hermanubis, of course, is the follow-up of Anubis. And Anubis plays big time into wolf mythology. And when it comes to wolf mythology, you have legends of actual actual men, or what appears to be men, transforming into dogs, into wolves. Then you have just the deity, the archetype, the mystical aspiration of a deity, dog, god. And oftentimes in the ancient world, people would have a spiritual deity which they prayed to, which they meditated to. And you cannot see, most people cannot see into the spiritual realm. There is physicality in the spiritual realm, the astral realm. Most people cannot see into the spiritual realm, but they feel spirit. They work with spirit, and so they need a physical representation for the spirit. And they create a statue or an idol as representation for the spirit. And what happened was, a god, or what does happen is a god like Anubis will be called in as representation for that spirit, or Anubis may in fact have been based on an actual wolf god. And this gets into the whole mythology, like Greek mythology, of the Minotaurs, the horsemen, the mermaids, the fish people. People heard of lizard people, were-cats, like the movie Sleepwalkers, half cat people who walk around. And so, but I came up with some funky presentations recently. One of them dealing with Snoop Dogg and wolf mythology. Now, growing up, I love Snoop's music. In high school, I remember buying T-shirts of the Snoop Dogg clothing line, and Snoop still has his clothing line today. And growing up in the early 90s, you never heard dog as much as when Snoop Dogg or the Dog Pound came up. You heard Snoop Dogg, the Dog Pound, Snoop Doggy Dogg, Doggy Style, the Dog Father, Dog House Records. Naturally, in the early 90s, people started saying dog to each other. What's up? What's up, dog? What's up, dog? What's up, dog? Now, my friend, who's a rapper, who probably maybe, he's made around 250 to 300 songs. He's written thousands of raps. He did a demo Razor did the demo to the Jameel Rawls soundtrack. Me and Razor used to listen to Snoop Dogg rap and the Dog Pound rap growing up. And we used to hang out in Muskegon Heights on a street called 7th Street. And we used to hang around guys like Poopsie and Baby James and Theodis and all these guys. And we went to Loftus Elementary School, right on in between 6th Street and 7th Street. We used to go up to the 6th Street store and play Street Fighter video games and go to play basketball at the 8th Street Park and drink pops and stuff and go play. We used to take Dr. Pepper, then go to Michigan Adventures. Back then my mother would give me money, and I'd take Razor with me to Michigan Adventures, and we'd go there almost every day. It would cost like $50, $40-something for us to get in, like $20 a piece at one time. And this is back in the early 90s, and we used to have such fun. It was from the Murder Was the Case soundtrack that Snoop Dogg made that I began recording Razor off of. The Snoop Dogg, we used the Snoop Dogg tape, the Snoop Dogg CD, Murder Was a Case. Then on the little cassette player, I would start recording Razor. And eventually I got into alternative esoteric research. But my presentations are created to bring people together. So the Snoop Dogg, the wolf mythology, the dog mythology, you see Snoop. I did one on Michael Jackson too, but I used Lon Chaney Jr., famous actor, Michael J. Fox, famous actor from Teen Wolf. He did the wolf mythology on Teen Wolf. And, I want my fans to know, the listeners to know, there is no bias here. If you hear rap music and all that, that's just me having fun. Don't be discouraged. I got a new forum on my site where I speak about how whites, blacks, indigenous people worked with each other or lived around each other before modern slavery even started. Who knows how long back this went? It could have been thousands of years ago that this activity was going on and just hasn't been written into our history books. But my format is about positive integration, so I want people from all backgrounds to feel welcome. I'm looking to interview different sorts of people and build a bond with new musicians, new actors, and formulate maybe a little series, a 3-part series. But right now, it's the wolf mythology that I'm working on. And one of the biggest things I've come out recently with is the thing about the coins. How a brown coin, of the brown penny of the Martin Luther King. I'm sorry. The penny, the copper brown penny with Abraham Lincoln. You can see how it faces one way, and all the other coins, and when all the other coins face the other way, it looks like they turn their back on Martin Luther King. And you can see how Martin Luther King freed the slaves. So the presidents turn their back on Martin Luther King through the coin. The presidents turn their back on Abraham Lincoln through the coins. I apologize. The presidents turn their back on Abraham Lincoln through the coins. You can see that. And so it's little presentations like that. I create stuff people never seen before, heard before, and I don't want people to feel that my work is biased more towards the black community than towards the white community. My grandfather, really wonderful man. He was an officer in the United States Air Force. He did a lot of tremendous good work. He was a really good man. He raised me partly. I've had white friends my whole life. I used to hang out with a lot of different people, and so I don't want people to think my work is more biased in one way or not. My work is about integrating people together, not separating people. It's built on positivity. So right now I'm working on the wolf mythology. Another thing I'm working on is faith healing, prayer work, to pray for people and to get people who may feel discouraged, or people who may feel that they don't have any work of their own, to motivate those people to come forth and get those people more involved spiritually in the show. And we ask that people pray for the Jameel Rawls show. But we're trying to get people who feel that they need an energy boost. People who say, hey, my life isn't going too well right now. I'm having problems. I'm surfing the internet. I came across your show. We want to motivate those people to step forward and get involved with group prayer. I do group prayer over the phone. I talk to people on a daily basis. I got another site, Metaphysical Consultant, and I got a show on that site called Jameel Show. So you have Jameel Show, then the Jameel Rawls Show, and I have interviews on. I do interviews for Jameel Show. Then my interviews on the Jameel Rawls Show is more about people getting to know me. Man, okay, so I'm going to tell some stories of some things that happened when I was growing up. What did we do? What did we do? I'm going to tell some stories about some reoccurring events, some reoccurring themes that occurred. Some reoccurring events, some reoccurring themes. You know what? I'll tell some stories. Okay, so Razor grew up. Me and Razor grew up right next to each other in the same neighborhood. We had a friend named George. We used to stay over. I remember one time, man, Razor came up with some idea to throw a sleepover in his backyard with a tent, and this is in Muskegon Heights. We're over at Razor's house. It's the middle of summer. I remember I had a headache that night, and Razor had a Sega Dreamcast, and we brought a tent in Razor's backyard, and our friend's name was Geo. We called him Geo, and Geo's a rapper too. If I can get my hands on some of Geo's work, I can put it online, but Geo's a rapper too, and Geo used to live right down the street from my father's house, from my family's house, the Rawls family's house on Howden Street. Geo used to live right down the street, and so me and Geo were already friends, and then Geo ended up over Razor's house one night, And we all grew up on the west side. We all hung out on the west side of Muskegon Heights. You know, Razor, my father knew Razor. Razor knew my father. I used to live right down the street from Razor's family. Razor lives down the street from my family. We all hung out with the same little group, about 10 of us. And this is back in the 1990s. I would say a lot of people that live in the area of the west side of Muskegon Heights claim homage to the west side of Muskegon Heights, but in actuality, a lot of the people living in the west side of Muskegon Heights right now really don't know each other as much as they did at that time. At that time, you know, we all went to the same school. We all slept over each other's houses. There was about, in the group we had, there was about 10 of us. There was about 10 of us that hung out, and we all knew each other. And so when I say the west side of Muskegon Heights, I'm talking about the people. You know, we grew up with each other. We hung out on 7th Street, 8th Street, 6th Street. We all knew each other. You know, I still go back to the area now, but I'm talking about my friends and how we lived when we grew up. We used to walk up and down the alleys, try to get cigarettes and stuff. I remember we didn't even hail cigarettes. We used to try to get cigarettes just to smoke them and be cool. We used to do a lot of different stuff, but one night we're over at Razor's house. He had the little Dreamcast. We're playing it. Geo shows up. We're all hanging out. And Geo wanted to get some weed, and we didn't have any weed. And so we went and took some old leaves and tore them up and tore them a piece and crumbled them up and put them in a paper bag and tried to pretend like they were a blunt. And I remember Razor was saying, man, we can't get any girls if we don't have any weed. And I'm like, man, what are you talking about? We can't get any girls if we don't have any weed. And at the time, I'm not interested in girls. At the time, I'm like, what was this? I'm like 11 years old, 12 years old. And I'm not interested in girls, you know what I mean? I'm not, and so I'm interested in video games and hanging out and stuff. And Razor's talking about, getting some weed and getting some girls. So we take some old leaves and cut them up and put them in a paper bag and roll it up, make it look like a blunt. And we're trying to get these teenage girls. And Razor's showing the girls the blunt. He's like, I got the blunt. And they're like, he got the blunt. They're taking it serious. And I'm starting, and these girls stayed about 3 blocks down from where we were at. And there was an old factory that separated us from downtown at that time in the 90s. But now the factory is gone. So the girls were further south, about 3 blocks down from where we were at. And they're taking it seriously. They're thinking like, Razor, he got the blunt. And so I'm starting to get scared. These are older teenage girls, like 16, 17, and they're serious. And I'm starting to get, and they're all like, who are you with? Who are those? And I'm starting to get scared, right? I'm starting to get a little, like, oh man, the girls are going to come over, you know what I mean? Like, so we start conjugating. And one of the girls, and then Razor's trying to make it to the point. Basically, Razor's trying to create as much of an experience as he can create before they realize it's not real weed. And so I know in my mind they're gonna find out this isn't real weed. They're not stupid. They're about 15, 16 years old. They're old enough to drive cars damn near. They're gonna know this isn't real weed. And so, the girl, Razor tries to touch one of the girl's arms. She goes, don't touch me, and she slaps his hand. And Geo starts making fun of one of the girls, and I'm just sitting there looking at her like, man, this is, and eventually the girls start, they get closer to us, and they get more comfortable, and then one of them grabs the paper, if you want to call it a joint, a blunt out of his hand. She tries to light it up, and it starts smelling like leaves, right? And I'm sitting there laughing, and she was like, I gotta go. This isn't real weed, man. And I remember, man, we used to have some crazy stuff going on. One night, man, speaking of that, one night, me and Razor were like in this old garage at this abandoned house, and again, we're like 11, 12, we don't know what we're doing. And so we take some big paper bags and roll them up, and we put them all together, and we pretend like we're like I'm trying to smoke the bag, but at the same time we got a can of spray paint. There was a can of spray paint in the garage, and as I'm lighting the bag, Razor takes some spray paint and blows the spray paint on the bag that I'm smoking. I'm smoking it like it's a blunt, and he blows the spray paint on it. So the fire comes and fires my face and burns my face. And I'm not joking. You can imagine it's a huge paper, like a huge paper bag, like a leaf bag, not a small paper bag. This is a leaf bag. I roll the leaves up like a big blunt, like I'm smoking them. Like I'm lighting up the lighter, I got the fire going. Then bam, he sprays the spray paint on it. So the flames come and burn my face. Man, I had, for like that whole night, I had to put cold towels on my face and stand in front of the air conditioner after that happened. That, man, I can't remember that. Man, we used to make... Man, Razor was crazy, man. I remember one time Razor took a can of hairspray, and he would light the lighter and blow the hairspray, and it would be big flames blowing out. And Razor was outside walking around with a lighter, blowing hairspray, making big flames go everywhere and stuff. In broad daylight, walking around doing. He used to do some crazy ass stuff, and there would be cars. He'd be doing some broad daylight. And one time he was outside, Razor started throwing rocks at cars, and the cars would slow down and stop and start cussing at him. And one woman was like, "Hey, you want me to call the cops?" And Razor would get Razor he was really scared, but Razor would kind of shy away and then come back out 20 minutes later and start doing it again. Man, we used to be like 24/7. That's the guy who did the soundtrack, Razor. You know what I mean? Growing up, man, we used to hang out all the time. And how I got from that to doing alternative research, I don't know. How I got from hanging out, and we used to hang out, these older guys who were famous in the neighborhood on 7th Street, you know, Poopsie, Baby James, Greasy, Theotis, and whatnot. They used to have cars with hydraulics, and they were well known. Poopsie, Poopsie unfortunately passed away now, but he's one of the most well known people I've ever heard of coming from, you know, Muskegon Heights, coming from the Muskegon. Poopsie's like famous, and Poopsie's like famous in the black community. A lot of people are afraid of him. He was known to do, you know, a lot of people were afraid of him, but every time I talked to him, he was real nice and real cool and everything. And, you know, these guys had cars with lowriders. You know, these guys, you know, it's rumored that these guys were heavy into the dope game and stuff at that time. And so, you know, this is back in the early 90s. So I would hang out in the hood with Razor. We had the friends, you know, the twins. Train was a good friend of mine growing up, you know, on 7th Street back. Man, we used to all go to the same school, hang out. We used to crack pencils where you hold the pencils. And, you know, one person has a pencil and they hold it straight. The other person sees if they can crack the pencil, or you crack knuckles and stuff. We used to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And, man, we used to have fun. And so I would hang out with these friends. Then I would go over to like areas like Grand Haven, Spring Lake. You know, I'd go over to various different areas. You know, again, I'm mixed, so I got a lot of white family. So I would have fun all over the place, man. I remember I used to hang out with different individuals way out in Grand Haven, and they would have nice cars, man. And they, you know, I always got in more trouble hanging out with white people than I've never got in trouble hanging out with black people. And that doesn't make sense to me. I have all the friends I grew up knowing in the black community. A lot of them sold dope. A lot of them, you know, a lot of these guys, you know, have been involved with guns and stuff. A lot of them are good people too. A lot of them are hardworking, good people. But the guys I knew growing up in the hood, they were always in trouble. still in trouble now. 30-something years old. A lot of these guys still get in trouble. Still good friends of mine. I never got in trouble with anybody in the black community. I always got in trouble with hanging around white people. And that's never been, I'm always trying to make sense to me how that happens. I always try to make sense of that. And it'd be stuff like, it'd be stuff I didn't even do. I'd be hanging out with these people, and it's like, they'd do stuff, and I'd be with them, and I'd get in trouble for it, and they'd be thinking like, oh, it was all Jameel. And I never got that. That's one thing that always tripped me out. But I had some good friends though that I'd hang out with. I'd hang out with some good friends, and we'd go down to the beach. We'd go hanging out. Man, we'd go all over Grand Haven, Spring Lake, riding bicycles and all this stuff. We'd have a really good time. Let me think. Growing up, Razor always stayed in the hood. That was one thing about Razor growing up. Razor always stayed in the hood. I never seen Razor. Razor's not going to go too far out of the hood. That's one thing about Razor. So I would hang out with Razor in the hood. Then I'd go to these other areas, and I should have stayed. Looking back now, you know what I mean? But I would go. My grandfather lived down in Ravenna. Oh yeah, Razor would come out to my grandfather's house. Razor would come out there, man. Razor would come out to my grandfather's house. My grandfather had like 400 something acres. He had these big tractors. We'd ride the tractors and all that stuff. And Razor would come to eat over my grandfather's house. And man, we used to have fun, man. My grandfather had a gigantic house, 400 something acres of property. And we used to go out there and have the times of our life, man, riding tractors and all this stuff. Let me see. Growing up, Razor. So this is the Jameel Rawls Show. This is just a time. Right now, I'm just reflecting. Right now, this is an intermission. I don't have anybody to interview right now. I'm just getting the Jameel Rawls Show site rolling. And, what I'm just speaking of what comes to mind. So I'm at my grandfather's house. My grandfather had a dog out there. My grandfather's dog, Max, right? We used to go walking miles and miles and miles down these long roads and stuff like that. I used to get tired, man. I remember I used to get so tired I could barely make it back. And how I got into I'm going back to think how I get in to the studies that I'm doing. There was one guy who led me into a lot of research. His name was Mustafa. His real name, he was a converted Muslim in Jackson State, in the Jackson State Penitentiary. The Jackson State Penitentiary is the second largest walled prison in the world. At least it used to be. They've tore down, from what I heard, they tore down a lot of the old blocks in the Jackson State Penitentiary, but the Jackson State Penitentiary was the largest walled prison in the United States, second largest walled prison in the world. Gigantic prison, right? They even made a movie called Jacktown. And a lot of people don't know, when at least at that time, many years ago, when people were in a state penitentiary, they had boxing. They had boxing in the penitentiary back then. They had movie theaters back then. Matter of fact, there was a book called 1 in a Million. It was written by a Detroit Tigers baseball player named Ron Leflore. And Ron Leflore was a famous Detroit Tigers baseball player. And I remember I didn't meet Ron Leflore. I read Ron Leflore's book when I was a teenager. And I read the book twice. I loved the book. That was the most exciting book. That was one of the most exciting books I've ever read. Ron Leflore, 1 in a Million. Leflore is a French name, but Ron Leflore is a black guy, raised in Detroit. He ended up growing up, I think, at the east side of Detroit, right around 7 Mile. And I got family around 7 Mile and Van Dyke. But Ron Leflore told his old story about how he grew up around, he grew up back in the 60s. He grew up back in the 60s around dope dealers, who sold the old pill, the reds and blue pills and stuff for like $1 a piece and whatnot. And this was before crack cocaine came out. See, the black community before crack cocaine was a completely different place. But Ron Leflore's book was amazing, one in a million. I tell people today, read that book. If you have a child, if you have especially a son, if you have a teenage son, give him that book. If he's headed for trouble, let him read that book. Ron Leflore did a robbery with a .22 rifle. He robbed a liquor store, right? Which, a young man growing up in Detroit in his late teens or early 20s, that's the types of things they get themselves into. But Ron Leflore ended up robbing a liquor store. He got caught. The cops came looking for the money, and Ron Leflore had been doing a lot of mischievous stuff all through his childhood. That was, he got away with a lot of stuff. He tells about it in his book, but he got caught on that. He ends up in Jackson State Prison. Man, he had some incredible stories about Jackson State Prison, and he talked about how in Jackson State Prison back in the 70s there was a helicopter that landed on the back 40. And it actually picked a guy up, and the guy got away. That's a true story. That actually happened on the back 40 in Jackson State Prison. A helicopter landed and picked up a convict and took him away. And the way the penitentiary system, the penal system worked many years ago is different now. Back then you had convicts. Today you have inmates. There's a different, the world of jails and it was completely different back then. So, but Ron Leflore wrote that book. He talked all about how some guy put hot baby oil in a cup, heated it up, threw it in another guy's face, all this stuff. And he was just explaining the story how he ended up in the hole, and he started doing 10 push-ups a day, and he stopped smoking cigarettes. And he spoke about in his book about how he got recruited by the Major League Baseball players. They came to Jackson State Prison, and Ron Leflore could run fast. When he was a teenager, he could outrun cars. He outran a car one time as a teenager, and in his book he talks about how he just started playing baseball in Jackson, they call it Jacktown, and he could just run fast. And the prison officials saw him playing baseball so well, the warden started watching him more and more and more, and the warden called the Major League Baseball players and scouts and managers and said, "Look, we got a guy in our prison who I don't think you're Mickey Mantle, or no, I don't know who you got on your I don't know what kind of guys you got playing for the Tigers, but we got a guy in prison who can outdo your guys." And so in the book, he says how a scout even came from Muskegon. Somebody from Muskegon, Michigan, was involved in his success. But Ron Leflore had scouts, managers from Detroit, and they took him out of prison. Ron Leflore didn't wait until he got his parole. The warden gave Ron Leflore his parole to get him out of the prison just because he could play baseball so damn good. That's how good Ron Leflore was. So Ron Leflore became a national Major League Baseball player on the strength of what he was doing in the penitentiary. That's a hell of a story. It's called One in a Million. And today, it should be called One in a Billion, One in a Trillion. I never heard a story like that before. So I read that book back when I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, we're getting into the Jameel Rawls show just more about. When I was a teenager, I used to do silly stuff. I wanted to smoke weed, hang out with different sorts of guys, and the teenage group, we're 12, 13, 14. I wanted to hang out with weed, so different sorts of guys would come and talk to me and stuff, and I wanted to smoke weed. And at that time, you want to be involved in different groups, right? And so I'm hanging out, smoking weed and stuff, which was a poor decision. And I never really vibed well with the schools. I never enjoyed the schools. I used to want to stay out late and sneak out and do all different sorts of stuff. And so I feel I probably made up for what I didn't do in school, I made up for in the alternative research field. But now Mustafa, who was a brother of a mentor of mine, he educated me a lot. Mustafa was in prison, going back, this is what we were talking about before we got around Leflore. Mustafa was in Jackson prison. Mustafa came out of prison after 20-something. Mustafa was in prison for like 20-something years. And I had an uncle in prison in Jackson. My Uncle Fat. My Uncle Fat was in prison for a crime he actually didn't commit. My Uncle Fat was living in Chicago at the time, and somebody broke into a store and stole some things from the store in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. They stole some TVs. It was like a warehouse. They stole some televisions and some things out of the warehouse, and some radios and whatnot. And my Uncle Fat at the time was living in Chicago, so they convinced. So the police at the time got a hold of my grandmother, and asked my Uncle Fat, to come from Chicago back here to Muskegon, Muskegon Heights, to verify this incident, because for some reason they felt it was him. They set him up on the crime. He comes back, and they set him up on the crime and convicted him of the crime, and he ends up in prison for like 15 years. The guy who actually committed the crime confessed on his deathbed before he died that he was the one who did it, and Fat didn't do it. And so Fat eventually, Fat got out of prison, but he was messed up, man. Fat was never the same after that. Fat was fucked up after that. Fat ended up on medication, all kinds of stuff, from being in prison all those years for a crime he didn't commit. He didn't commit the crime, and back then it was different. Back then, black people didn't have basically any format. If you, a black person in the legal system, it's not too much different than right now. Black people still get treated extremely similar to how it was then. Maybe even worse in some ways, who knows. But Fat had no voice. And so they arrested Fat and ran Fat through the system. And, Fat was my uncle. And Fat got all these years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And so Fat had a real Fat went through hell after that, but Fat made it out. Fat made it out of the system. Fat made it out of the system, and and so, but Sky was in the system. Sky was in the system, and Sky made it out. And Sky taught me a lot, man. Sky broke the crime down to me, explained a lot of different things to me. This is part one. We're going to do a part two in a little bit. Okay, and welcome back to the Jameel Rawls Show. And we left off, I was talking about Mustafa. Mustafa was a Muslim. And Mustafa was the kind of Muslim that had a lot of alternative perspectives of society. And I've dealt with a lot of Muslims in my life. If you're coming from the black community, you're going to meet Muslims. A lot of times Muslims are created in the prison, in the state prison system. When somebody gets locked up and goes to jail for a long period of time, usually prison, they become a Muslim, they convert. In prison, people have the little sections where they can pray. They have the Quran, they have the prayer rug, and they can pray on Islam. Now, me personally, I had an experience growing up where I got into some trouble, and the trouble that I got into really wasn't, the activity I did really wasn't serious, but it got made out to be serious. And I'm going to explain it very simply. I was hanging over in a really nice, wealthy area with white people. I was hanging around with white friends, okay, and my white friends, some of these guys, I'm not saying any name part, I'm not pointing any fingers. This is something that happened. There's nothing, I'm I'm a 30-something-year-old man. This is something that happened when I was in my teenage years. I'm just showing people what happened. So I end up hanging out with these guys, and basically people want me around in order to try to get things like marijuana. Try to use me, say, hey Jameel, can you get a hold of somebody to get us some pot or something like that, or do you have any connections? Can you do that? That type of thing. So these white kids are wealthy, they're rich, so it gets into a situation where they wanted to get some alcohol from nobody was old enough. We were all teenagers. And in Michigan, if you're a teenager, you can get sentenced as an adult. So we're all teenagers, and everybody wants some alcohol. So there was a large group of young white kids, and they want some alcohol. So, there's something called garage hopping, where you take alcohol out of garages. We got into some activity, and there was some alcohol taken out of some garages, and the garage doors were open, but the garage doors were attached to the house. So technically that makes it home invasion. And this is why young people have to be very careful about getting involved with in these types of scenarios, because something very simple that could be a slap on the wrist can be drastically escalated to be categorized as a major criminal activity. And we went into there was some activity that happened. Some alcohol got taken from the garage, but because the garage was attached to the house, it was considered home invasion. And there was some alcohol and some beer cans and stuff taken. Some other younger people had done some things as well, and I took a lot of blame for the activity that happened. And this turned into felony activity, criminal activity. And there's people who've made this thing public on the internet, and so I'm explaining this to people so they can get a feeling of who I am. I didn't need to steal anything. I didn't need to steal. My mother would always make sure I had way more than enough growing up. I was spoiled growing up. I had more than enough money. I had cars when I didn't even need cars. My mother made sure I had a car and stuff like that. I'm a teenager. I had really nice clothes, expensive clothes. I went on trips all the time. I didn't need to steal anything. I'm not a thief. I was hanging around a group of young people, and everybody wanted some beer. And that made me guilty by association. I'm hanging out with these people, but because I'm with these people, and I'm the one who's black, and I'm not turning this into a racial thing. My white fans and my white listeners, I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm communicating. I'm not saying this is a black or necessarily, I'm just saying that realistically, these kids, a lot of these children, teenagers, came from wealthy parents. They were all white. I was mixed. I was black. If you're mixed, you're black. And this is a white court system, all white people. So I became a scapegoat. And a lot of other people didn't really get in trouble or get nearly as much trouble. So, but it put me in a situation to where I was on probation. I was on felony probation. And at the time, I made a mistake, and got in some trouble on probation. I was at a party and I was drunk, and I was driving home, and I got pulled over, and the judge said, "Well, you know what? You're not probation material. You're on felony probation. You're on probation material. So I'm going to sentence you to 18 months in prison." Now, at the time, I didn't know. I was just a young guy partying. I was still in my teenage years. I was 17 when I did this stuff, and I think I was 17 when I did this. So I ended up on felony probation, but I was in jail. I had so much time in jail that I had so much credit. I wasn't in prison that long. I was only in prison for, so I had so much time already in. I got out of prison after a few months because of the credit I had, the county credits I had. So I get out of prison. I go through prison, and I go through Jackson Prison. Now, I went through Jackson Prison. I was on the north side, and then from the north side, I went to 7 Block, and 7 Block was huge. That was quarantine, and it was interesting. It was like Alcatraz. It was an ancient old prison, and 7 Block they don't even use 7 Block anymore. But 7 Block was where everybody who used to go through prison at one point in time went through 7 Block. 7 Block was gigantic. There were shooting galleries and shooting ranges where you could see holes in the wall where gunshots had been fired, where people used to get shot and shootouts and stuff. The guards used to shoot the inmates, and you could see riots had happened. And Jackson Prison had been sectioned off in the 80s. Late 70s to the 80s, about the 80s, early 80s, mid 80s, especially late 80s, they started sectioning Jackson off because they couldn't control the population. At one time in Jackson State Prison, you had 3,000 guys on the yard at one time, and the guards couldn't control the prison anymore. They didn't have the training for it. These guys are in prison. You got sophisticated criminal elements together in prison with each other, and these guys are constantly working out, lifting. These guys are creating organizations in the prison system that cannot be contained, and the guards don't have the training or the policing skills to deal with it. So they had to section the prison off and break the prison down. So when I went through the prison, I started seeing the old parts of the prison. They got factories in Jackson Prison. They had all sorts of stuff. And so I go through Jackson Prison, and the ironic part is I ended up seeing Razor in 7 Block. And I'm like, Razor? I saw Razor in 7 Block. I was only there for I was in the north side most of the time. I got the 7 Block. I was only in 7 Block for one day. I was on the north side, which was it wasn't nearly as big as Block, a 7 Block, but it was the same crowd. And so I got to 7 Block, and I saw Razor, and I was only there for one day, and they were giving us milk in plastic bags. I've never seen that before. And so I go from 7 Block to a level 5 prison. This level 5 prison was known as Michigan Youth, the Michigan Youth of, what's it called? Michigan Youth Prison out in Baldwin Prison. It was a prison in Baldwin for offenders. Now, I'm an adult. I'm an adult. At this time, I'm an adult. I'm 19 years old. I was on felony probation for a period of time, got a DUI. I ended up being I'm in a Michigan reformatory prison. It's not a placement. It's not a youth. A lot of people are going to listen to what I'm saying, and they're going to try to categorize this as a youth facility or as a state placement for youth. No, this was real prison. This was Michigan prison. In Michigan, you can be sentenced as an adult. You can go there. But what they did was they did this. They created a prison in Michigan for ages, 13 to like 15. 13 to 15 were separated on one side. Then you had 16 to 19. And so you had, so I'm an adult though, but I'm an adult. I'm 18. I'm over 18. I'm an adult. I'm 19 years old. I'm an adult. And I'm in the prison system. And as soon as I get there, I saw a guy who I'm connected. I saw a guy who is related, who is married into, whose family is married into my family, and we're basically like cousins. And he's running a bunch of Muslims, and it surprised me because at that time, why would you have a Muslim population of prisoners in a Michigan Youth Correctional? That was called Michigan Youth Correctional Facility in Baldwin, and so that kind of tripped me out. And so I said, man, I hope I don't stay here that long. That was like that place. And then he was like, oh man, he was like, man, Jameel? I was like, yeah. He was like, man, don't worry about nothing, man. Everything's gonna be all right. He said, I'll talk to you later. And so So, you know, he was involved with high-ranking people at that. He knew all these guys from Detroit who had been involved in murders, who had been involved in drug deals. So what he did was he basically put a hand of protection over me. And so everywhere I went in that building, everybody knew that I was connected to him and his family. Everybody knew I was related to him. No matter where I went in that prison, I had a level of a protection over me. And he did it. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. As soon as he saw me, he told like 2 or 3 more people, and then that was it. I never had anybody approach me or say anything crazy to me. Nobody ever. It was like all the top people who were the most dangerous people in the Michigan Youth Prison in Baldwin. They all knew. They all knew who I was, and they knew to make sure nothing happened to me. He did that for me, and he was in touch with all the high-level Muslim prisoners. And I'm like, man. And at the time, my mind wasn't that mature. My mind wasn't mature enough to comprehend that. His mind was more mature than my mind, but we were in the same age group. He was a serious criminal. He wasn't a serious criminal. You know, I'm not making him out to be a bad guy, but he understood the criminal lifestyle and the criminal mentality in the prison system, and I didn't know it. I was just a young guy who made a mistake and got involved in taking some fucking beer out of a garage with some white kids, and they made it into 10 times more than what it needed to be. So I end up in the prison system, and he puts a level of protection over me. And these guys from Detroit, I'm in there with all the guys from Detroit, all the guys from 7 Mile and Van Dyke, from the east side of Detroit, from Joy Road in Detroit, from 6 Mile in Detroit, from the Southwest Detroit, the Mexican and stuff from Southwest Detroit. I'm in prison with the roughest teenagers ever out of Detroit. Murders, guys in there. You don't know how many people in there had 2 flat. They got caught with a gun, 2 flat, 2 years. Guys in there with life, murders and stuff. And my roommate was so crazy. I was with him in quarantine. I call him Little Terry. We call him Little Terry. And Little Terry was so crazy, man. Little Terry was my roommate. And Little Terry's like, man, that's your cousin? How do you know him? That's your cousin. And Little Terry would eat all his candy and get hyper as hell. And Little Terry would run and jump over tables and stuff like that and hop around. This is a prison, but it's a bunch of youth offenders, man. These guys are... This was the worst prison in the world because you had the most dangerous killers in this prison, and it's a level 5 prison, but everybody can be in it. I'm only doing 18 months. I have so much time credit. I'm in prison less than a year, but because it's a level 5, but because I'm under 20, if you were under 20, you were qualified to go to this prison. Because I was under 20, I was sent there. And I'm in there with guys doing life. I've never heard of that. You have teenagers doing a year, 2 years, who are in a level 5 prison with guys doing natural life. In the adult prison system, you never see that. If somebody is doing natural life, they will never make it to a level 1 prison. They might make it to a level 2, but never to a level 1 prison, but they have to work their way down. They have to work their way down from level 5, level 4. They have level 3s, not like they used to, but level 3s still exist. So I'm in there, and now Razor had already been to Baldwin. Razor was in Baldwin before I got there. And I show up there, and all the people from Muskegon that I know, they were like, man, you know Razor? I'm like, yeah, man. And so all these guys, a lot of the guys that grew up in Muskegon Heights knew me or knew my family. There was people in there who I knew from that area, from the area of the West Side. So, but Now my cousin-in-law, QB, we call him QB, he put the hand of protection over me in there, so all the higher level of criminal gangsters in the black community from Detroit who are Muslims, they became cool with me. And so I was ordering Tupac tape. I was hanging out with all these. I was hanging out in the yard with all these guys from 7 Mile and Van. I got family in 7 Mile. But I was hanging out with all these guys from East Detroit and all this stuff. And I was sitting there listening to everything they were saying. They would talk about, the YBI, Young Boys Incorporated, or the Chambers Brothers, or the different groups that came out. The Young Boys Incorporated sold drugs all over from Detroit, everywhere. And the younger guys in the prison, they were telling me about how their family, they were schooling me pretty much. I didn't know nothing. I'm coming in from stealing. They're like, man, you're in here for stealing some beer bottle. People were laughing about the stuff. They were like, Jameel, what'd you do? I was like, man, I stole some beer out of a garage. They're like, you're in jail you came to prison for stealing beer out of a fucking garage? I'm like, yeah. They were laughing. They couldn't believe it. These are guys, some of these guys had triple murders. Triple murder. I'm explaining, I'm in a level 5 prison explaining to a guy with triple murder how I'm in prison for stealing beer out of a garage. Man, you get the picture? You get the picture? So I'm on the yard, I'm talking to all these different people. I'm hanging out, listening to Tupac tapes, Too Short tapes. At that time, we had little tape players. And in the Baldwin prison, you could order TVs. You could order them through something called music by mail. And so I ordered my TV. My mother made sure I had everything I needed. I ordered a little TV you could see through it. I ordered the little tape players, the music by mail. And so I'm sitting there looking at all this stuff, enjoying, sitting there looking at all this stuff. And my bunkie was so funny. Little Terry from the east side of Detroit. Little Terry was hyper out, eating off candy. Little Terry had money too. Little Terry always had, every time the store came, Little Terry would have so much money, he would order a bunch of candy. Little Terry would stay up all night eating cakes. We called them cakes. They were little oatmeal pies you could buy out of a box. We would stay up all night listening to BET, 50 Cent, The Game and stuff. And we'd be, Little Terry, that song The Game came out in the club, Hate It or Love It, Game, Hate It or Love It. And these newer artists were coming along, and Terry would stay up all night talking about the east side of Detroit and all that stuff. And man, we had fun, man. And Little Terry was my dog, man. Little Terry got into a fight one time. Little hyper black dude, right? He got into a fight with some other guy. Some other guy was like from the west side of Detroit. Little Terry is from the east side of Detroit. And there's a tier, and we're over in H2 Bravo. I came in through H1 Charlie, and now we're over in H2 Bravo, and there's a tier upstairs, and Little Terry gets into a fight with a guy up there, and at nighttime they give us little sandwiches, like little snack sandwiches and bags and stuff like that. And Little Terry started throwing sandwiches at this guy. Little Terry just started throwing. The guy kept saying West Side, and Little Terry went, bitch, fuck you, East Side. And Little Terry started throwing sandwiches at him, and the guy thought Little Terry. It started off they were just playing around, and then Little Terry would be like, you stupid bitch, East Side, and throw another sandwich at him. Excuse my language, and then it got more serious, as it usually does. Then they started fighting, and it was so funny because Little Terry had all his energy, but the guy was much bigger than Little Terry. And so Little Terry ended up, the guy started to get the best of Little Terry in a sense, but the guards eventually broke it up. And back then though, when I was there, the guards didn't interfere with the fights. People got fucked up in Baldwin. I saw some people get fucked up in Baldwin prison, and the guards would come in with a video camera and be recording all the fights. I wonder what happened to that footage. They would record all the fights. So you got to imagine, you have a group of young people, and you have elements of serious criminals who are in there for murders. Then you got guys who are in there who shouldn't even be in jail, who for petty ass stuff. I was fortunate to know the right people in the prison system, so nothing would happen to me. A lot of these other guys that came in there, they weren't that fortunate. I saw some people get fucked up. I saw some motherfuckers get fucked up in there. And I would be watching, I'd be like, what is going on? This guy is in jail this guy is in jail for some petty ass stuff, and he shouldn't even be here. And these guys would come like a guy came in for joyriding, and he had a roommate with 2 murders. Like, how the hell do you put somebody? The guy was like 15 or 6. No, the guy was like 16, 17. He got a joyriding charge, and they put him in a cell with the guy who was doing life. This guy is doing 5 years. The guy with the joyriding charge was doing 5 years. The other guy is doing 2 life sentences. How do you put that together? And so it was a really fucked up. It was, excuse my language. It was a really fucked up scenario, and eventually they closed the prison. Now the system is fucked up around here, but excuse my language. But so little Terry had all that energy, and I was in quarantine with little Terry. Little Terry was crazy, and little Terry wasn't doing that many years, but little Terry didn't care though. Little Terry was in there like he was at home, and so little Terry, I stayed in contact with little Terry too. Matter of fact, I stayed in contact with little Terry. When I got out, man, I'm praying. I hope I hope he's all right. I hope he's all right. He was real hyper and all that stuff. There were some other people. Let me think, man. There were so many people in there. There was one guy. He got his parole, and then after he got his parole, he was still getting into fights. He went to the parole board, got his parole, and after he got his parole, he was still getting into, purposely getting into fights with people. And I didn't get that. Why he went through all this stuff, got his parole, and he was one of the most he was from Grand Rapids. We called him Little E. He whooped so many people's fucking ass in prison. Then there was Little G, my other friend, Little G. He was a white guy. This is really crazy. We call him Baby G. There was a little white guy we called Baby G, and he was fucking up everybody. Excuse my language. He was messing up everybody. We called him Little G. He was a white guy from Muskegon. His father was a boxer, and he was beating up everybody. And I'm not joking. I was in the county jail with him, and I watched him beat some guy up for like 15, 20 minutes, and fuck the guy's face up. He was in prison. He was a shorter white guy from Muskegon, but he was beating up guys from Detroit. White guys, black guys. He was beating up black guys 6 feet something tall. He didn't care. Back then, you had a lock and a sock, or you had the adapters they used for the tape players. He took an adapter. And went out to the yard, and 2 guys tried to jump him, and he hit one of them in the face with the adapter, and the other guy took off running. But he didn't need a weapon. He was beating motherfuckers down. We left. He rode out with me. I had my parole. I wasn't worried about that, right? Because I went to the parole board, and the parole board was like, man, they were like, why? What kind of trouble did you get into? And I said, man, look, man, I was with some guys, it was over some damn beer in the garage. He was like, all right, man, you got your parole. Don't worry about it. So I get my parole. So I go over to the, I go over to to another prison before we go home, and little G rode out, baby G rode out with me to the other prison, and he was still fighting there. He jumped over a pool table and punched one motherfucker in the mouth. And I'm sitting here watching this. I go through the whole prison system just watching people getting fucked up, repeatedly fucked up. I was like, man, this is crazy, man. I got into one fight with a roommate of mine. Not over, and it was over, you know what, man, I'm trying to think, what the hell did we get into? It was over something stupid. And, you know, I hit that motherfucker in the mouth, and he fell down. And, you know, after that, we made up for it after that. But, you know, I wasn't, but he was, you know, he was cool, man. We became friends. After that. But, you know, I went through the system, and I watched all these people get, I was just like, man, this is crazy. So that's when I started really getting in touch with the research. Before I got out on parole, I got to the other prison, and I'm sitting there learning from the older black people that were Muslims and stuff like that. Now, I wasn't going to convert to a religion. I'm not religious. And in prison, a lot of people become Muslims for protection, and I don't need protection. You know, I already know enough people. You know, I can take care of myself with another individual. Then I know the right people if I ever need help from another group of individuals. So I'm in this scenario where I get there, and I'm hanging out with various individuals. There's various different gangs and stuff in the prison, yada yada. But the older guys are like, man, I knew your father. And I'm like, did you? And so I'm not stupid. I'm like, you know my father, you know, what kind of car did he have in this year? Or who did he know? Or who's his sister? Or you know, I know how to question a motherfucker. Excuse my language. So I found out from certain individuals, you know, about how the system works, about how the prison system works and whatnot. And they started teaching me about sovereignty law, you know, different guys from the Muslims, the black Muslims. You had the regular Muslims, who a lot of them were involved with the Nation of Islam. Some of them weren't. They were just Sunni Muslims. You had Sunni Muslims. You had the Moors, the Moorish Science Temple Muslims. You had the Melanic Muslims, which were considered the more violent Muslims. You know, and so I'm sitting there talking to these individuals and learning, and they start teaching me different interpretations. And one guy was in there on a murder. He's out now, though. I saw him a few years ago, and he's all right. He's fine, but he stayed in prison for like 20-something years, and he was in prison for 20-something years, and he taught me everything about. He taught me everything. You know, we call him, his name Duke. We call him Duke. He taught me everything. He had an old law typewriter, and he could type up legal transcripts. He could do anything in the penitentiary system. And he typed up all these old legal transcripts and all this stuff. And so I'm sitting in the prison system learning from him. He's teaching me about the Quran. He's teaching me about the jinn. He's teaching me about all these different various interpretations of Islam. Then I started learning about the Nephilim. I had never heard about the Nephilim before. And I was studying, I had heard about the Roswell stuff, the JFK stuff. There was a white guy, looking back, there was a white guy who was teaching me about the United States government and the Constitution and sovereignty and status and money, the difference between the Federal Reserve and the United States. There was an older white guy who was teaching me about all this stuff at one time when I was in the county jail. And then before this, I was studying stuff through my grandfather, through other people. But when I started hearing about these various interpretations of the law, I was like, wow, man, this is interesting. Then I started hearing about the Nephilim. I started hearing about the Nephilim, and You know, that he was schooling me on the Nephilim, talking about the angels and all that stuff, and the interpretations. And I was like, wow, man, you know, there's a lot more going on than I thought. And it made me take my life, you know, it made me take my life a lot more seriously. The fact that I didn't have this knowledge before, this knowledge wasn't presented in the school system, and I'm thinking, like, why was I not told this in school? Why didn't anybody teach me about this stuff in school? This guy, man, there was so much stuff this guy was teaching me. He had a book of the Jubilee about the different Christian mythology about the different births. Something about the book of Jubilee. He was teaching me about that. He was teaching me about the Islam and stuff and all this different stuff. And he would just sit there for hours and hours and teach me. Eventually, I got a call out to go to the law library, and I was learning and reading. And then it made sense. Later on, I ended up reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, a couple years later, and it made sense. Now I see how Malcolm X went from being involved in criminal activity on the streets to going through the prison system and coming out minister Malcolm X. Because in the prison system, people have 15 years, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years to sit down and just study and read. They don't have to do. They're not bombarded by the complexities of society and everyday life. They have nothing to do but just sit back and read and study. So I would be sitting there conversing with people who had, if somebody came to me and I was talking to them and they're talking about anthropology. They had just read 15 years of anthropology. If they were studying law, they had just read law books for 20 years. And to give you interpretation, I remember one day there was a guy saying, I get out tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, you get out tomorrow? And he said, yeah. And I'm saying, how do you know you get out tomorrow? I said, you get out tomorrow. He says, yeah, I just did 20-something years. 20-something years. And so I was like, wow, man. Wow. That's 20-something years. You get out tomorrow. And he had all this extensive knowledge. All this extensive knowledge about law, the system, and all this stuff. So, but one thing I learned is never take education for granted. The time I spent hanging around people getting drunk and whatnot, younger people, I should have been, if not in school studying, I should have been conducting my own studies. I learned so much more from researching, to be honest with you, the sad part was I learned more in jail than I did at school. In a sense, at the high school level, I learned more information in jail than I did there. And so that was a wake-up call to me. But man, I'm just going, this is Jameel Rawls show. I'm just going through explaining different scenarios, people. So at this point in my life, for years, I don't get involved. I'm not involved. So the reason why I felt compelled to explain that scenario of me getting in trouble is because a lot of people may not be sure what they're seeing. There's people on the internet who speak a lot of negativity about me and try to paint pictures or depictions of me that are not realistic or accurate in any kind of way. And it has been multiple years before I have been involved with any illegal activity. I am not involved with anything illegal. I have not been for many years. I'm 30-something years old. This has happened when I was a teenager or my early 20s. I don't get involved in crime whatsoever. In no shape, manner, or form am I involved in any kind of illegal criminal crime activity. I know a lot of people. I do research on a lot of different things, so I just want to make that accurate for people. But so on the Jameel Rawls show, this is more about me, so I just want to explain that. And so So, you know, that this is part 2 to part 1, and where I want to take this is to keep. We're gonna bring some more guests out in the future and get more into some more interesting stuff, but this should be enough right there. All right.